Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here in the first session for the Classroom Strand. My name is Kimberly Yannick, and I'm a partner with the Center on PBIS. And I have the great privilege of working with some brilliant folks today for the Classroom Strand. So we are going to start this morning with some colleagues of mine, Lisa Powers from the University of Missouri and Erin Shapiro from the University of Oregon. And they're going to start us off with this big balcony view and then some really concrete resources that we can use when we think about integrating PBIS and academics within the framework. Terry Scott, if you haven't had the opportunity, I know I see his fans in the room, myself included. He will facilitate the second session in the Classroom Strand. And then we have some colleagues from a local school district with Rayanne Silva from the Smart Center, who will be looking at that level of integrating social emotional with behavioral in the classroom. And we'll top it off tonight, if you're still with us, and it's a great time. Steve Goodman and myself will be facilitating the classroom session for dialogue to be shared amongst those of us who are implementers. So I'm not going to say much more than that. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Erin. They are brilliant. I'm so excited for you to learn from them today. So please join me in welcoming them into this space.
Good morning. Can you hear us okay? Okay, what? No, not yet. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, this is gonna be the biggest challenge of the day. Is Erin and I are educators and we're used to walking around, and they told us we have to stay in this spot. So we'll do our best to do this. I'll introduce myself and then Erin will talk a little bit about her history and her work in this field. So as Kimberly said, I'm Lisa Powers. I'm from the University of Missouri. I'm rooted as a special education teacher. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but many years ago. My role in special education was working with children with emotional behavior disorders, and I had the honor of doing that for 10, 15 years. During that time, I attended a lot of training and got a lot of information. And little did I know back then when they sent you to training and you came back and implemented what was in training, they thought you were just wonderful. I thought that was the requirement, that when you went somewhere, you had to come back and implement. They pulled me out of the classroom and asked me to be a behavior coach, consultant, and then eventually I went into PBIS. And I did that supporting teachers across 24 school districts and then school districts. I became an administrator as well, and then left that field and the last 8 years or so with the university. And I have the honor of working across different states with different districts, and I get to go in many, 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 many classrooms. So one thing I want to say to start with is what I'm sharing today is not my own knowledge. It's from having the opportunity to see and watch and the trust to be in classroom after classroom, week after week, and I still do that today. Erin's going to talk a little bit about herself.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. It's just an honor and a privilege for me to be able to present with Lisa. We're kind of new colleagues. We've only been getting to know each other over the last year. I am housed at the University of Oregon, but I live in Southern Oregon now. I was telling folks on a small farm now. But when Brandy showed that map of tiered systems of support earlier, the timeline in our keynote this morning, she showed 2000 was really right around when things were getting going at the federal level. And when this National TA Center first received funding was in 1998. And I had just pure luck of starting graduate school at the University of Oregon, where the first TA Center was funded, to Drs. Rob Horner and George Sagai. And those two were my professors and Dr. Kent McIntosh and I were in the same cohort together. And there's other people here I know from a school district. There's a school psychologist who we were also in graduate school together with. So we were so lucky to see PBIS from the ground up. We as graduate students got to work in some of the schools where they were trying out PBIS or EBS. As anyone was around at an EBS school back in the day? Anyone? Okay, a couple of head nods. So it started out as EBS, then it went to PBS, and then we got the cease and desist letter from Public Broadcasting Systems. And then we became PBIS, or PBIS, as some TikToker teacher influencers will have you believe. So anyway, so I had the great privilege and joy of learning from the thought leaders in the country in this. I started as a school counselor before that and worked with students at high school who couldn't read. And when I saw that, I was like, how did this happen? How did we get to high school and these students can't read? And so then when I went back to graduate school at University of Oregon, I started in early reading and early intervention. So that program that Brandy showed in the keynote, the ECRI, I actually was one of the main research team members to help develop that and was a part of that work initially. It's now had a life of its own, so it's just like so exciting to continue to see that work grow after, the last 15 years. So yeah, I guess that's all I'll say right now, but I'm just so honored and privileged. And I want to say thank you to all of you. Big gratitude for being here. There's a lot going on in our world. There's a lot going on in your buildings, at your homes, and it's just an ultimate privilege and honor. And so this will be interactive. We'll be asking you questions. We'll ask to turn and talk to your partners. And I would say raise your hand too, and we'll repeat those questions and get them into the microphone so that our people who are watching on video can hear those questions too. So thanks everyone. I'm so excited for you to learn from Lisa.
Thanks, Erin. We make a good team with her lens and looking at academics to start, and then the lens that I'm looking at in behavior as well. I think we covered these 4 questions. Okay. Thank you, Kimberly, for getting us started. So we've done an introduction. Why are you here? What are we hoping to get out of today? Here's our outcomes for today, is that you'll be able to identify the common features for core practices in academics and behavior. So that when you talk to someone at lunch today about the session you attended, you can be really clear that we have a shared understanding of what this looks like. We're going to talk about examples of what does it look like to integrate these core features in the classroom. And then Erin's going to share some of the barriers and challenges and how we can address those. So those are our 3 outcomes. Anything else you would wish for today? I feel like I have to stand on my tiptoes. Anybody else, anything else you would wish for in our time together today? Concrete practices. You want to hear every story I've ever saw, every intervention I've ever saw. Before we get started, you all are following a strand. So what we want you to do is to meet people, because the expertise that we know is in this room. So we want you to meet people and do these 2 activities. One is check in to see how your colleagues are doing today. Just pick a duck that matches how you feel and then share why you feel that way. Some of you already are that flattened duck, I can tell. Then the second activity is, what did you hope to get out of this session personally? And then what do you hope to get out of this strand? So take a minute, meet somebody new, introduce yourself, and then we'll come back together and we'll be listening to make sure we meet those needs. Take about 3 minutes. All right, when you finish that thought, that sentence, we'll invite you to come back together. All right. Thank you so much. And we hate to break up the party because it sounded like great conversations. We will be doing multiple turn-in talks. The good news is this morning, Brandy talked about many of the same concepts that we're talking about tonight. Today. The good news is that we're aligned. The other good news is repeated practice builds fluency. And so we're going to be talking about many of the same concepts, but what we're going to ask you to do is think about what will that sound like and look like in your environment. So, what were some of the conversations you had? Just shout out and we'll repeat them. Why are you here with this group of fun people that you'll be with all day, that I might join in the last session just to see how you end? What are some of the things that are motivating you to be here? Yes?
We're really excited to not just look at academics in a silo and behavior in a silo, but how can we start looking at them together within a system?
Absolutely. So we're excited to look at them together. We go over here for academics, we go over here for behavior, but we really need it together.
I would piggyback off that. As an administrator, I have my instructional coach with me, my
Yeah.
social worker, instead of sending it as silos. How do we
Yeah.
work together to support our teachers?
We often run by titles, right? I had a behavior title. No one asked me about academics. But every time the behavior is happening in reading, we know, right? You all can see all that, right? Yes.
Yeah, district does, second step is our second, our social emotional curriculum.
Uh-huh.
So we want our school to not just teach the lesson and be done for the day, how
Yeah.
to integrate it for the rest of the day as far as SEL, right? So this PBIS
Yeah.
integration is about academics goes right in line with that. So that's kind of, we want to see how everything connects.
Absolutely. So they have a social skills second step program in their school, and they want it to be more than just the lesson of the week or the day, but how does it fit in with reading, math, biology, whatever you happen to teach? Absolutely. So you all could give this speech up here, talk up here, because that is exactly what we're doing, is we're really looking at how do we connect these things. How many in here are classroom teachers? All right. How many of you support classroom teachers? What other roles are in here? Administrators? Counselor? Regional coaches? Okay. Principals? Yeah. So I might say that we all are working together, because classroom teachers are on the front line doing this work, and principals are building the resources and supports around there. Counselors are as well. And if we are supporting teachers to get academic and behavior foundational pieces in place, then we know children are more supported, right? So that's kind of what we're going to chat about more today. I'm going to invite you to read this for a second. I can tell when you finish, because we chuckle at the end, right? How many of you have been one of those teachers that have set up your room exactly how you thought it would go, but that's not who came in? We're going to be thinking about this as we think about our time together. How do we plan for the students we think we're going to have, and then how can we be flexible and adaptive enough to differentiate, intensify, and individualize when they need it, which is what Brandy started with us today. One of the good news that I think about thinking about this work in the PBIS academic connections is if we get fluent in the tier 1 practices, when we start providing support for children who might need something different or additional or more intense, it's easier because we already know it. We're just doing it a little bit differently and individualized. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what that might look like. So keep this in mind moving forward. Also keep a classroom in mind that you might ask yourself some of these questions. So here's what we know about students, right? That student behavior is often identified as here's what we know about student and teachers, that they're connected. That when we struggle with student behavior leads to teacher stress and confidence and efficacy. That how many new teachers or how many teachers have been teaching a long time, but when behavior becomes a struggle for them, they don't think they're doing a good job. But we do know when children are learning and succeeding academically, teachers' confidence level goes up. So we know we need to look at these two things together, because we need to have children have access to good instruction so that they can succeed academically and that teachers can feel less stress. And that's kind of why we started with, where are you right now? Because we know teachers are stressed in doing this field if we're dealing with a lot of different things at the same time. We also want to think a little bit about students and what's walking through our door right now. We know children are experiencing more mental health issues than ever before, more depression and anxiety. I was just sitting next to an assistant superintendent at the keynote, and they had data on exactly how many children are depressed or have anxious symptoms, and it was over 40% of their district. And that's a lot, right? So we need to think about how might our tier 1 be more intense than maybe a neighboring district that may not have those students walking through the door. During the pandemic, children verbalized this to us, and you can read the stats in detail. But we also know they didn't trust the schools to give them the supports they needed in that area, and that the families weren't really sure the schools could support children with this need as well. And here's a question. 7 out of 10 schools report an increase in mental health needs. Is that your school or district? Raise your hand. So we have even the majority in here today. So the question is, why do we integrate? We know that if we have improved academic skills and improved behavior skills that we need to be working those two things together. And the core things that we want to walk away with is effective context for learning. So how do we set the environment up so learning can happen for each and every child that's in that classroom? Not just 70% or 80%. How do we select appropriate content? What is it that we're teaching for both behavior and academics? And how do we use data across the grade level, across the classroom, across the school to inform? Do we need to ramp up more in our instructional practices and or provide more supports in behavior and those two things together? And how do we support educators? I love the principal that brought her team here. How do we support educators with implementation? Teachers should not have to do this on their own. We're in this together. So I'm distracted by next door, but it sounds fun. Sorry about that. Research suggests a strong relationship between academics and behavior, and right now we're working in separate systems, right? For the most part. And that we need to think about what does integration look like within our school and in our context? We know that when we remove a student from instruction, we're actually increasing the probability they will have more academic issues, right? But we do know that they share many of the same common features. And the key here is, how are we effective and efficient in using our resources to be able to integrate this? Was working in a district where we had protocols and we were doing classroom walkthroughs together just to listen and learn, how do we see things? And there was a protocol for math walkthrough. There was a protocol for reading walkthrough. There was a protocol for their social emotional curriculum walkthrough, and then there was one for classroom practices. And the administrators were overwhelmed by all the protocols. So we sat down and we said, what are the key features of each of these? And let's start by looking, are those things in place? And then we can work to say, how do you adjust, or when you need a little more for literacy, or when you need a little more for math. But right now we were working on everybody's protocol being the top protocol. I don't know if I have anyone from this district in here, but one of the things that one of the districts we're working with did to start, this is how they're going to blend them, is they have a building principal who is going to do supports for all teachers around academics. They're picking one, math, social studies, or literacy. And they're going to be doing walkthroughs and providing the supports and training and professional development that teachers need. The assistant principal for the first semester is going to look at behavior. And they're doing classroom walkthroughs in each and every classroom in the next 10 days. And then that data is going to drive the supports. The classroom walkthroughs are de-identified. No teacher is getting any kind of write-up. They're getting a positive note of something positive they saw for being invited into their classroom as they leave after each observation, but that's going to drive their professional development. So what we want to think, and that's not my idea, that's from the districts, right? So what we want to think about is, what is your rollout for beginning to integrate this work? Here's what we know right now, is that if you implement PBIS well, we get good outcomes. If you implement RTI with fidelity, you get good outcomes. What do we know about if we implement them both well together? It's an assumption we're making. Brandy is giving us good data that it's beginning to happen, but we don't know for sure. We need to study a little bit more. But you all are telling us we need to do it, so we need to figure it out. The other parts that we want to think about is, what are the core features of integration, is you want to think about what are the evidence-based practices that are a priority for your school, district, or classroom. What data are you going to look at to monitor how well it's being implemented and what the outcome is? What are the teaming and coaching structures? How do I know if I need a little help with something, who to contact, who's going to help me with it? What team am I looking at this data with versus by myself? And then how are we doing integrated professional development? So I just sat down with a school a couple of weeks ago and we planned their professional development for the year. And two things we noticed that we might want to think about is there was a lot of focus on the literacy piece, and so they integrated some of the social, emotional, behavioral pieces, the classroom pieces. One of the things that stood out is special education had a completely different professional development plan, and they weren't part of it at all. And we need to be in the same space together. So there are supports for us to think about that. We understand time and vacancy issues. We want to problem solve those challenges. Because how can we be in the same space? Because they can help us with differentiating, intensifying, and individualizing. But if they don't know the core practices to connect to, it makes it a little harder. Oh, and then the last thing is, how is your district supporting this work? How many of you have a district team that's looking at prioritizing your classroom practices? Oh, just a district team. We'll start there. Okay, if you don't and you're a classroom teacher, advocate for that. How many know your priority effective classroom practices that your district prioritized? Okay, you can come back to them with this list if they don't have it. These are the ones that we want to work on and get fluent in. Here's what we also know is that children come to us uniquely. And if I come with difficulties in reading, it can lead to behavior challenges because I might want to avoid reading instruction. If I have a difficulty paying attention, then I'm not accessing the reading instruction. I see head nodding because teachers can relate to this. I come in with risk, either trauma or language barriers or communication barriers, and then I might struggle with both behavior and academics. And so we know that these things are all connected in the students we serve. So how can they start to be connected in the work in the way we create an integrated approach? So some considerations we can hope it happens, let it happen, or make it happen. And so you're here today to make it happen. I'm gonna skip a couple, you can go a little deeply. We know that where we're gonna spend our time is setting prevention pieces in place when we think about Tier 1, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we set up each and every classroom in our school? If I'm a classroom teacher in 3rd grade and I have all the effective classroom practices in my classroom, but the classrooms next door to me or the 2nd grade teacher didn't, it just made my job harder. So we want to work in a community so that we're all implementing effective classroom practices. We want to strike a perfect balance. We're a PBIS conference and we promote the use of PBIS, but if we know we push that too far, then we're not getting the good outcomes we want. And we know if we set up just rigorous standards and we hold everyone to the standards, but we don't build in time to teach those social, emotional, behavioral skills, we're going to struggle there as well. So it's the balance of thinking about the implementation of these things. Remember I started with, I was a classroom teacher with children with emotional behavior disorders. At the end of each year when you would do the IEP and the children would make growth, their office referrals completely decreased, they met their IEP goals. But then if you looked at their reading level and they were still 2-3 grade levels behind, I didn't do my job. But according to the individualized plan, I did. So we need to start thinking about the whole child and all the different pieces, if that makes sense. So you just heard my why and my driver. Before we talk about what it looks like in a classroom, take a minute and chat with a neighbor. What have you observed in your school's classrooms? Just like, where are we all starting from? We'll listen in and come back together. Okay, when you finish that thought, that sentence, we'll invite you to look this way. All right, thank you very much. So I just learned that for some reason the slides aren't posted, not sure why. So we will follow up with that. Everything here will be posted, don't worry about that. It was not meant to be a surprise and for you to, they were done ahead of time, I'm not sure what happened. I'm sure it's me. So We'll follow up on that. Here's the best part now. We're going to talk about what does it look like when we really do integrate this in the classroom. I didn't dream this up. All the people that Brandy talked about wrote this brief that if I was going to say one thing that you walk away with from today is downloading this brief, because it gives you examples for everything. And I'd invite you to think about how can we use it as a grade level PLC to begin the conversation, or at a staff development meeting in our school, or at a district team meeting to help us pick the priorities in our district that we're going to support to happen in each and every classroom. What I also can appreciate about how this is rolled out is we think about it in these 4 big categories, and we're going to think about the classroom across all 3 tiers in the next 10 minutes. But we're going to think about them in these 4 big areas. So we're going to think about what do we do to prevent, and how do we set up the classroom for success? What do we do to teach, both academics and behavior? How do we respond? And then how do we decide and make decisions? So if you walked out of here, these 4 big areas, it aligns with everything that Brandy talked about this morning as well. So here's the first thing. In each and every classroom, do we have these things in place? And we'll start with the first one. Do we have effectively designed spaces for learning? And we think about this, do teachers know what an effective classroom design looks like? We've been in it for a long time, but we see our classroom. We have a district that did field trips, and on their PD day, they went in and walked into each and every classroom, and then they nominated what was they considered the best. I'm not a competitive person, so that wouldn't have motivated me, but going in and seeing all the other classrooms would have. Because then you can see from the outside, how do teachers use their space? How do they set things up for success? Remember how we set up the classroom before kids even get there? How do we adjust that? So just setting up the classroom so that it's clean and respectful. One of the districts we were working with said when it's a messy classroom, children think that we don't respect our own space, so then they don't respect it. But it's messy because maybe as teachers, we haven't thought about where everything needs to go, and how do we help teachers think about that and organize for that. And if I had a colleague that had it figured out, I would love to learn from them and not have to think of it on my own. So that's why doing these field trips and looking for the design and how we set up space. Also thinking about our walls. When we think about our anchors for academics and our anchors for behavior, is it clear and is it in a place where we can use these things together? Or is it small and up in the corner somewhere? Or I've been into classrooms where there's just so much there, I can't figure out what to look at when. So how do we make the most important things evident for the children we serve? Then how do we differentiate that? So if we're thinking about a student who might need more, how do we think about having a calming space for a child who might need a calming space? And that's clearly outlined. So for children who need that, I've already set it up ahead of time. Another priority is how do we develop and teach routines? Teachers are good at this. We have 1,000 routines. But how do we think about routines and prioritize them? What are the most important routines? And when I work with teachers, I always ask this question: what exhausts you the most? What are the routines that you have in that time? Is there anything we can do to help with that? Because we want you to have energy across the day. So thinking about the routines, entering the classroom, and if we need to differentiate, are our routines written in multiple languages? Are there visuals for children who need visuals? Are there children who need, as a classroom teacher, I would set up my routines for the year, but then there might be that child that may need a 5-step routine that we had for the class, might have needed to be 8 steps for that child. So how do we add a few steps for children who might need more? See how it becomes easier if we have these routines or these effective practices in place, we just adjust them slightly for children who need more. The next one is how do we select and define classroom norms and critical social emotional behavior skills? How are we ensuring that our classroom expectations are aligned to our school-wide expectations? And then how do they meet the needs of each and every child in our classroom? Are we sure that they can see themselves in the norms and community we're making? Do they get to have a voice in that? How does it reflect some of our social emotional skills that we're teaching as well? Are they embedded in our matrix? And how are we prioritizing those? And then we think for children who might need more, how do we maybe have prompts or specific norms or social emotional skills on their desk so that can be a reminder of what they might need. And then my favorite is actively supervise. How are we ensuring that I call it a wandering reinforcer? How do we move, interact across the classroom? How are we setting up our classroom so that I can catch you following, meeting those norms, our classroom expectations, using those SEB skills on a regular basis? And when we might need to differentiate, how am I ensuring that I'm around you a little bit more, giving you more positive feedback? Because otherwise I'm going to get attention to you and I'm going to need to catch that up. We have a great podcast from Cassetta Brown. I don't know if there's any St. Louis public people in here, but she talks about putting it in the bank. The more you can put positive connections in the bank for children, then when you need to make a calm, respectful correction, you've got more to build from. So thinking about that active supervision is a way to build that reinforcements, give reinforcements to children on a regular basis. I think I skipped one, connecting with students. How do we connect with students in a meaningful way? We just did greetings at the door. We talk about getting to know them. A lot of the restorative practices work have great strategies for this, right? We have another podcast on that if you're interested in that. Not that I'm trying to promote it, but just even having 1 minute authentic conversations. Tell me about your day. Tell me what you like to watch. Tell me who you hang with after school. Tell me what your after school is like. Tell me what your morning's like. Just getting to know them so that you can have authentic, real conversations. And then if we need to differentiate, we might need to talk to families, invite them up for coffee or a chat. I know that's a little extra time, but it's time well spent to build connections with the full community. And we want to think about building connections in addition to open house, reading nights, any kind of things where we bring families into school. For those families who can't make it, I don't know about you, but I'm a working mom, and I don't know how many of those I missed in my lifetime that I still hear about. My children are, in their 20s or whatever. But we try to connect in other and different ways. And then how do we make it inclusive when those families do connect? I'm telling you, I lived by a lot of stay-at-home moms, and I was a working mom. So and I'm kind of quiet and shy. When I got into those groups, I was intimidated because they'd all been together and they all talked about many things. When you bring families in or connect families, how do we invite them into a welcoming, opening space? And then engaging in effective instruction. How do we ensure we're using good practices for academics as well as good practices for behavior? This is just a sample of a classroom I was in a couple days ago, and I snapped it up here. I know it looks busy, but one of the things I like that this teacher did is you look at her think, pair, and share. She put exactly each step she uses it a lot, and she has it clearly defined, and you can tell that what grade this classroom is by looking at their steps. Sit face to face and close. This is not high school. This is elementary school, right? The children knew exactly what to do. And any of the other opportunities to respond strategies she has in place, they're all listed up there. So she just gives a quick prompt and cue right before they go into using that strategy. I also like a neighboring classroom in the same school. She had taught the routines. This was at the beginning of the year. She taught the routines, and then she asked the children, how do we feel about our new routines this year? And she looked at their faces they drew of themselves to give her feedback on are you comfortable? Do you think you know how to do school well this year? And she can see she got a lot of positive feedback. This is another classroom in which they went over their norms. Nice job in that they connected them right to their school-wide. I see head noddings. You can see it right away, connected to their school-wide expectations. But then each child agreed or committed that this would be how we would work in our community and signed it. So that was a way for them to get engaged as well. And this is in the PE room, so it didn't stop just in classrooms. And then real quickly, after we've spent our time in setting the classroom up for success, what do we do next? And we teach. We teach academics, we're good at that. Now we think about teaching behavior. And I love this second step kind of connection. I used to be a second step trainer way back in the day. But here's what I know. We become fluent at training or teaching second steps, the lessons for it, but we really want to talk about what are the most important lessons to teach and when do we cue and prompt it. The transfer and generalization is the hardest part. And some of our curriculum and materials really focus on rationale and discussion and not a lot of practice and role play. And we know that's super important. So we just think of I do, we do, you do in everything, in academics as well as in behavior. So we're going to teach explicitly, and then we're going to provide specific positive feedback. You've heard this over and over today, right? One of the things to think about is how, first of all, as those of you raised a hand as a classroom teacher, what is your feedback ratio? And then what type of feedback do you give? If your district allows, just doing a 10-minute sample or recording is a great way to kind of get some information about what do you do routinely. Building a process of tallying your positive to correctives, because what we think we do and what we actually do may not be the same thing. So as a classroom teacher, I had to work to get here. And so my colleague and I would take data on each other on a regular basis. And that was how we communicated whether we met the expectations. One day in December, I got a little, it was actually January, got a little note on my desk and my ratio was 33-6. Not the right way. If you had asked me at that day how I did, I would have said fine, everything was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was 9 months pregnant in winter clothes when the heat was on and it was 80 degrees outside. I was hot, I was tired, I didn't even know it, but it wasn't my students' responsibility, it was mine to make the changes. So with data and information, I came back the next day, drank more water, changed how I was dressed, and took a couple extra breaks in the day. We built it into my schedule to make it through the next 3 weeks. Does that make sense? But how do we use data in a non-accusatory way? It was just information. But if you had asked me, I would have said something different. And then how do we respond? Again, the more we're used to interacting with students. Oh, one last thing on the feedback. It's important to find out how children want to receive feedback. So asking them is important. So I'm kind of a quieter person, but I'm verbal. And I had Clarence in my classroom that every time I would give him positive, he had ADHD, he was all over the place, and he would get to writing and I'd come over and say, nice job. Thanks for being respectful and starting right away. I see you're doing, and he would just throw everything up. I just got started and you interrupted me, right? That was not productive for him. So I would put Post-it notes on his desk as a way. And then I've watched, he collected them across the years. Or you can use your school-wide tickets, however you want to do it. But think about the type of feedback for each individual child might be a way in which you differentiate versus what happens to the entire class. We talked about the ratio, just knowing your ratio, but also responding to unwanted behavior. How do we do it in a kind, respectful way? And my colleague who I co-taught with over the years said, I can almost never tell when you're correcting behavior or when you're reinforcing behavior because you keep it almost at the same tone, which was good information for me because I think I should get a little more excited when it's appropriate. But we want to be super respectful and clear and kind. Give feedback in a way that they can make adjustments quickly, and then as soon as they move towards that, it's a positive feedback. Does that make sense? And then how do we decide? How do we monitor fidelity of these different practices? Working with your trusted colleagues, inviting them into your classroom to get feedback, or self-monitoring is a great way. And then how do you connect to, if I'm implementing these practices with integrity, how is my class doing? What are the outcomes I'm getting from it? Here's just a sample walkthrough that some schools use, or it could be a self-assessment. When we talked about differentiating. So take 1 minute and think about the Tier 1 practices in your classroom. Which ones are missing and or need to be enhanced? We'll take a minute and then we'll come back and talk about Tier 2, Tier 3, and challenges. Okay, when you finish that thought, that sentence, we invite you to look this way. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm hoping that you walked away with something you can use and bring back to your classroom. I am going to give a plug for Terry Scott, who's next. You're going to love and laugh with him a whole lot, so you're just going to have a great time. But in addition to that, his videos, when we were talking about how to respond to challenging behaviors, we use those in schools all the time because teachers can see an example and a non-example, and it clicks. Like, this is what it looks like, and it doesn't take all that different effort, but I just need a model. And so those videos are super helpful, so stay tuned for that. All this information is in the brief. We just want to give you a couple examples of what Tier 2 might look like in your classroom. So thinking about a child who might need additional support, what could that look like? And we talked about differentiating already a little bit, and this is a little bit intensifying. So if you have a child in check-in, check-out, how do you set up your classroom so if they have a daily progress report, there's a space to put it. So you're setting them up for success right away. When you talk about teaching and you think of check-in, check-out, how do we teach the routine? What does it look like to come in and have a conversation with me? And where do you put the form? When do we give feedback? What does that look like? What does it look like in the end of the day? Where do you go? So be involved in the teaching of the check-in, check-out. Going back to prevent for a minute, also when you're building a connection, in addition to giving feedback around the school-wide expectations, that's another nice time where you can slip in. So tell me a little bit about your day or what happened or that movie you watched last night or something that you've already learned about them. So you can build in a little more connection there as well. And then how are you ensuring that as soon as you give that feedback on each of those 4 or 5 times, whatever the predictable times around your check-in, check-out, that you are giving corrective and supportive feedback during that time? So it's a way to take what you already know and then use it to individualize or intensify for a particular child. And then how are you involved if you have children with additional supports? How are you involved in seeing how they're doing over time? Is the check-in, check-out person in the morning, are they giving them the sheet on the regular basis? Are they meeting with them? Is it happening in the afternoon? What is my average score across the week? How are you involved in that decision-making process? So getting involved in Tier 2 in the classroom as well is important. And then for Tier 3, we want to think about once we individualize, and the brief has wonderful, great examples for that, what we want to think about is how much simpler it might be if we know the individual plan for a child, if it connects to practices I already know. Right now, there are children sitting out there with IEPs and individualized support plans that we haven't either had access to or time to read, but we're still responsible to implement. Thinking about how you can be at the table when those plans are made so you can ask the questions. What do we do to prevent the challenging behavior from happening? What are we all teaching? What's happening in special ed and general ed? How are we teaching the same thing? How are we cueing and prompting? How are families engaged in that decision-making process? How are we responding the same? What cues and prompts might we give? If we keep in this same prevent, teach, respond, and decide, when we're individualizing around the practices we value, it becomes doable, is what we want to leave you with. So we invite you to have one more turn and talk, and then Erin's going to come up and chat about some of the challenges and barriers and how you might address them. How are you providing social emotional supports for children who are not responding to Tier 1? How are you gathering data around Tier 2 and Tier 3, and what supports do you need to implement? And you can pick one of these questions to chat about, and then we'll come back. So this is at a perky pace, and Erin's going to come back and bring us home.
Okay, if I could ever get everyone back here and wrap up what you're saying to your partner. Wrap up what you're saying in 3, in 2, and in 1. You all are all-stars. Thank you so much, everyone, for being so engaged. I love coming into this bubble of the PBIS world for a couple days every year where you can turn and talk to a complete stranger and know you're going to find a friendly person and know that you have something in common, and then you can celebrate together some of your common values and goals in education. So thank you, everyone, for for doing that. I'm going to do something that we don't normally do. I'm going to just a touch off script here because I want to make sure that everyone does get access to this MTSS in the classrooms. Is if you've got your phone or your computer, go ahead, right? This is what teachers never do. Students, please take out your phones. And go ahead and open up a web browser and go to pbis.org. Go to pbis.org. Fortunately, we got there early, so we were able to get the web address. And then in the search with the little the search icon in the upper right, type in the words MTSS Classroom. And then the very first document that comes up is this brief. Oh, yeah, or sorry, does that make sense? Okay, so basically go into any web browser, go to pbis.org. And then at the top right, or if you're on your phone, there's like one of those little hamburger menus. At the bottom, there's the magnifying glass. That's the search function. So you click on that, and then it opens up a space for you to type something in, and you type in MTSS Classroom. Now I'm doing it with you to make sure. And then you get, oh gosh, it didn't come up right away. Okay, when I did it on Google, it came up right away. Let's see here. Classroom PBIS. See, well, this is good. This is why we gotta do this together here. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, you can see how many resources there are on here. I actually did it in Holler if you find it. Oh my gosh. It's there? It's, oh, okay, good. Well, I'm glad you all are being more successful than me. What is it called when you look at it on yours? Okay, great.
It just says download resource, a little blue box on the bottom.
Okay, perfect. Good. Yeah, so, and if you do it in the Google browser too, it comes, when you're in Google, it says the first thing that comes up is the Center for PBIS. If you search for pbis.org and then you put MTSS Classroom, then that's one of the first documents that'll come up. So go ahead and download that. There's a lot of different resources on pbis.org, and that search bar, that search function will be your friend in many years to come as you're getting started with PBIS. The other resource I want to share that Lisa made me think of as well is the perky pace, she said, if you've all heard that term before. And the first person I ever heard say that term is Dr. Anita Archer. Raise your hand high if you've had the privilege of seeing Dr. Oh, good. Lots of people have. So that's another great resource is if you go to Dr. Anita Archer's website, Explicit Instruction, I think it's just explicitinstruction.com. She has a number of instructional videos on there at the elementary level and at the secondary level of delivering explicit instruction. And it is no mistake that explicit instruction is really built in that engagement, active engagement, because they were really co-developed at the same time when PBIS was being developed with the same cognitive energy in the same academic spaces. So that's why there's so many great resources that, and Dr. Terry Scott, I guess, was an educator in Oregon in Ben Lapine School District. And so there's a lot of just co-thinking about these pieces together that happened. So that's why it's no mistake that there's a lot of similarities there. So I just want to give you a little word of encouragement here because this work of PBIS and MTSS implementation is like extreme mountain climbing. It takes a lot of effort. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not something that you're going to do by yourself. You need a team, and that team needs to be led by a common goal, a common vision, and you have to plan for everything. And the weather changes as we know right now. Everything, right? You have to plan for the fire drills or, the bus breaking down, all of those things. You've got to make sure you've got your sufficient supplies and gear. Those are intervention, our instructional materials, planning for when things go wrong, and then training, and coaching. Actually, I have a colleague from the University of Missouri let's see here, Aaron, and he actually did get to hike Mount Everest not that long ago. And he trained for a full year before he was able to hike Mount Everest. And he went up with a team of 10 people, and then the Sherpas that were working with him, and their coaches, if you will, their supporters to get up on the mountain. And out of the 10 people he went up with, only 3 of them actually made it to the summit. And so it's just evidence that there were Sherpas that were there, that were well prepared, that were planning for frostbitten toes, to make sure that they had all the resources. Everyone made it down safely, but not everyone made it to the top. And we're really in education where we want to make sure that everyone is along the ride with us, wherever their peak is going to be on their journey with us. So just keep that in mind, that it takes time, it takes effort, and this isn't a quick fix, as evidenced by the fact that we've been doing this for 20 plus years. And I will say that when we first started this 20 plus years ago, it was only a few schools here and there. And now, y'all, 1/4 of all the schools in the United States are engaged in some form of PBIS implementation. So that's so exciting. You're a part of that legacy. And so I want you to feel, pumped up with us that like you're going to take this home to your school, but it's a part of a much larger movement. And we know that there's struggles out there, and resources are commonly a barrier. Since I often live on the academic side of things, it happens so often that people say, oh yeah, we got this new curriculum with these beautiful new materials, but they didn't give me any of the student materials. Oh my gosh. Well, how can I implement this curriculum to the fullest potential if I don't have all the materials to go along with that? So we know that not having the right materials, not having the right programs to match our student need is a barrier. So here are some things that you can do to prepare for those barriers. One is start small, start with kind of pilot programs, see what's available free or low cost. If you're not ready to go big scale with adopting a huge database, the consultants and the fees that are associated with that, there's so many free resources that are available. If you're not sure, ask around, reach out to your regional support, your district support, and they can help you with that. Take inventory of what the teachers have in their classroom and ask them what they need. With that, you have to say we can't always do things, but do everything. We can't fill every wish list, but let's find a few things that we can work towards together. Leverage existing resources, so modifying those Tier 1 curriculum to provide more intensive support. As Brandy showed us in the keynote, sometimes Tier 2 is just about taking what you already have in Tier 1 and intensifying that instruction by offering more, as Terry's going to talk about later, more opportunities to respond, as providing that pre-correction before we get into the lesson. Hey everyone, this is what's going to happen right now. Remember, you've got these skills that we're going to engage, and when I want you to respond, this is what I want you to do. Okay, let's do a practice. Okay, everyone got it. Great, now let's go into the lesson. Just by adding those instructor language that is really clear, really precise, you're increasing the intensity of instruction without adding a whole new curriculum and program that's a Tier 2 program. The other note I want to say about that is some of the work I've had the privilege of doing is working with emerging bilingual students and students who are newcomers, especially in the middle grades. And they, newcomers, they had very little English in the program I was working with. And so they actually had to come into like science class, middle school, social studies, and not have any English. So when you have these classroom routines set up, it allows those students who are emerging bilingual students to not focus on what is the teacher saying, what are these directions again, because you've already gone ahead and laid the groundwork for what those instructional routines are, and that helps them to decrease the instruction or the cognitive load on how am I supposed to behave, what does the teacher want from me. Instead they can focus on the instructional content that they're supposed to be learning. So all of these strategies are helpful for a wide range of students in your classroom. One of our other barriers is that the number, and Lisa alerted or talked about this earlier, is that the number of students who need to be served are more than what we traditionally have capacity to serve. And so that's why it is really so important for us to think about how the Tier 1 and Tier 2 are working together. I have really gone away from showing the triangle now because the triangle does really not exist. The triangle is a myth. It's a unicorn. And, really we have to, people are like, yeah, we have a rectangle at my school. But I really want to focus more on us thinking about pie charts, and that we have different pie charts in our buildings. And we have a pie chart for reading, we have a pie chart for math, we have a pie chart for mental health support, and behavior. And really we're thinking about, all students are in the green zone at all time. We're all working towards to support every single student. But right now, at this time in education, we have more students than ever that are in this tier 2 zone that need our support. So that means we really do have to think about how we can integrate social emotional supports, behavioral supports for everyone in the classroom, in the primary classroom. And frankly, we weren't taught how to do that, right? When we were in our teacher education programs, I was a special education teacher, master's program, and we weren't taught how to do that even in that. So it means that we have to provide our teachers with more support, and understand that we have to think about tiered support for our teachers as well, for coaching. And if you've got a teacher who has half of her students are, needing tier 2 support for social emotional wellness, how can I as a coach offer support to that teacher, not because she's not a good teacher, but because we know she's got a lot of needs in her classroom. And so what can I do to help you? Can I co-teach? Can I model? And that's for administrators, coaches, thinking about how to support those teachers. So strengthening the quality of tier 1 instruction is so, so important. And I see a lot of people just jumping to tier 2 and not doing the work to stay focused on really shoring up tier 1, because no amount of tier 2 is ever gonna fix a poor quality tier 1. And right now, more than ever, we've got to really bring our A game. Coaching is essential. I'm going to move ahead from coaching just because we're running a little bit out of time. But as you all are engaged in this process, how many have seen this idea of the model for managing complex change? Okay, maybe like 10% of you or so. I find that this is that I have used this in my career over and over again. And as you are a coach, as you're an administrator, as you have a co-teacher or you're a grade level team member, it's so helpful to think about when my colleague is showing resistance to this, I'm not going to take it personally. I'm not going to put up a wall, because really this person is showing me that we as a school haven't provided the rationale for the motivation for what we're doing. A lot of times these PBIS, MTSS, we're being told to do that. And we are smart individuals who are creative, and a lot of times we don't like being told to do things. We want to do things because we want to do it, we know it, and we understand the value of it. So if we haven't done the work as a school, as a community, to make sure that everyone understands the why we're doing this and to hear the voices of what their concerns are, what their questions are, then we're never going to get to that change, to that systems change. So you can kind of use this to say like, oh, if people are expressing confusion, then they are not seeing that end goal of where we're going. Or if someone's telling you they've got anxiety about adopting this new program, well, they're saying, I don't have some of these skills and I feel nervous about that. Resistance, I already mentioned. Frustration, I don't have the resources. You're expecting me to do this, but you haven't told me which forms I need to do. So all of these things helps us to take out the personal and think about the resources that we're giving people along the way. And then all too often, without that action plan, we have false starts. So you're like, oh yeah, our school started doing that and then we didn't finish it because we didn't have the right form. So that's why this idea of getting ready and getting started, those phases are so important so that you don't jump in too soon and then people feel like, oh, we tried it and it didn't work. Okay. Watch out as you're trying this integration of MTSS and PBIS that one doesn't fall off because you're focused on the other. And I've definitely experienced this where our tier 1 system was so strong at our school, we were doing great and we're like, okay, we're ready for tier 2. And we jumped into tier 2 and our tier 1 started sinking. And it wasn't until the midpoint in the year that we realized, oh wow, we really dropped the ball on some of our tier 1 systems. So you got to keep an eye on both of those and make sure that people aren't spread too thin across initiatives. Which brings me to my final topic. I know we've got just 5 minutes here, but this is my new favorite topic, is de-implementation. Instead of implementation, de-implementation. So how am I going to de-implement some of the practices we've been doing for a long time that no longer are serving us, that no longer work, that are taking valuable resources? So we want to prevent abandonment of valuable resources and practices like PBIS by making sure we have that sustained funding, leadership training, and I'm going to click to the next slide here, so that we have to identify what are the low value practices, reduce how much we're using those practices, and then provide improved replacement of these high burden or more high value, low burden practices. So think about that carefully as you're like, I'm going to adopt this. You're leaving here with like all sorts of motivation, if you're an administrator or a coach, you're like, oh, I got some new things for my teachers to try out. Maybe write down the 5 favorite and choose one. And the same thing when you're out there coaching teachers in your classrooms. Recently, I was working with someone and they said, we gave the teachers all the resources and they're just not using them. I was like, well, how about you just focus on one resource and ask people for this month to focus on that one resource, work together to say how it worked, did it integrate, not, it didn't, can I come in and model and practice it in your class, narrow it down because we've got a lot going on. So just to wrap up, it is only when enough of the people within an organization that an organization can be transformed. So we've got to work together to get to that tipping point within your schools, to get to that tipping point within the country. This was our teaming framework that we used in Oregon when I was leading the Oregon MTSS project there from 2010 to 2015. So one of our lessons learned was really doing less and doing those fewer things really well. So with that, we only have a few minutes left, but I just want to open it up to a question or two, and Dr. Lisa Powers will join me. We've got Dr. Kimberly Yannick here too, who can jump in. Any burning questions you have? Yes, go ahead. Yes. Yeah, so you will have access to the slides. We are going to email and make sure that they get posted, so you will absolutely have those. I'm going to put a plug in for Lisa's a podcast. If you're not one of the cool kids who has already downloaded this, check it out, The Educator's Blueprint. There's tons of great guest speakers that are here actually at the event here too. So okay, gosh, I just want to congratulate you all for being here, for taking the time, for just doing what you can to bring your schools and your teams along with you. It's for the benefit of our students. So thanks, everyone. Go team. Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't forget about the evaluation, because we love our data. Come see me at the database decision-making session next.